23 after the hour. We're on Family Net Television and Sirius 161. We're glad to have you. I'm Marcus Ryan, filling in for the esteemed Larry. And Lorri, of course, is here.
Yeah, I sure am. And I'm real interested in this next guest that we have because he's, you know, we love amazing stories around here. He's got an amazing story. And he can also, he's very topical and timely. And, you know, Bernie Madoff basically got handcuffed and carried out of court yesterday.
Yes.
So he's got an interesting perspective on that story that maybe very few others would have.
Interesting, because amazing stories many times lead to things.
And that's definitely what Chuck Gallagher has. Hey, Chuck, thanks so much for coming in today.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
It's good to see you. You and I know each other through the National Speakers Association.
Absolutely.
Because now you go out and speak on the topic of ethics, and people will learn why in just a minute. But it's not often that we have an ex-con in our studio with us. You can relate to Bernie Madoff because you were doing well in the financial world. Will you pick up the story from here?
Well, I understand where Bernie Madoff's coming from because as much as I hate to say it, I actually created a Ponzi scheme. And, you know, when you sit back and you look at what took place, there's so many questions that come up. How does something like that take place? How can you prevent it? And I understand from the inside what happens. First question typically I get is, well, why does somebody do that and what happens? And I have to admit, back in the 80s, I was, how do I want to put this, overextended and underfunded.
Okay.
Or I had too much debt. And if you look at the economy that we have today, that's the same thing that people are facing. In my case, I couldn't make my house payment. And I looked for, well, what can I do? How do I get quick money?
But Chuck, you were a CPA. You were doing well. Why couldn't you make your house payment?
I had too much debt.
Yeah.
I lived the life. I believed that being somebody was a function of everything that you had. The house that you lived in, the car that you drove, the clothes that you wore. It was all the illusion.
But often in your situation, is it most often intentional you start out with that as a plan, the Ponzi scheme, or is it inadvertent that at some point it morphs into that?
It morphs into it.
Okay.
And
You
in fact,
just wanted to pay your house payment.
I just wanted to pay the house payment. In fact, the banker called me and he said, you know, you're behind in your house payment. And I'm like, well, yes, I was, but I didn't have immediate access to cash. So I committed what is the typical for fraud. Need, I needed money. Opportunity, I happened to be the trustee of a client's trust. And rationalization, which was, well, I'm really just borrowing the money. Now, that's not true. It was theft. But I convinced myself that it was just borrowing. And when I paid that first theft back, I solidified the rationalization. So if you listen to what Madoff said yesterday, it started off as something simple, and he thought he could ultimately cover it.
Oh, like an opportunity, necessity or an opportunity. Thinking, man, I don't have the money to do this, but if I can do that, great return, I'll put the money back, and then I'll make a nice little profit.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, he acted like he was just trying to help his clients.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the reality is we get caught up sometimes in our own illusion. And I have to be honest and say that's exactly what happened to me. I got caught up in the illusion that it really was just borrowing money.
But you said you paid it back, so is it still illegal?
I found out it was easy. Well, it's you know, if I take money from you and you don't know it, it's illegal. We can call it borrowing all day long. There's no borrowing to it.
But I'd be okay with it if you paid me back.
Yeah, but you didn't know. That's theft.
Out of trust.
Out of trust, absolutely.
All right, so you found out how easy it was, and one thing led to another.
I found out how easy it was, and I got caught up in the illusion of it, and I took more and more, and I created the grander illusion and lifestyle. And the funny part, and I don't mean ha-ha funny, but the odd part that really solidified it was the fact that as the illusion grew, so did my client base.
Oh.
Yeah. That's an interesting
scary
point. Now, how does that happen? How does it move from this makes sense and it's reliable, predictable, solid to having its own weather system, its own legend?
Well, and that's exactly what takes place. It does happen, and people love to be connected with people who are successful.
Yes.
That was true with Madoff. It was with me to a much lesser extent. But the more I exuded success, the more successful people wanted to be connected.
Okay, Chuck, this might be a hard question, but did you ruin people's lives like Bernie Madoff has?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I made restitution, which unfortunately for Madoff's victims won't take place, but it didn't change the emotional impact that those people had. They didn't like me. I broke the trust. We aren't friends, but I did pay them back. And for that, I'm eternally thankful.
How were you able to pay them back?
With the help of friends and family. When the house of cards is pulled, which always happens in these schemes, and everything collapses, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion. You all And when that happened in my case, I had to go home and I had to tell my partners, the people that I stole money from, my wife and family, that I was nothing more than a liar and a thief. But fortunately...
Did you say it like that?
Well, I didn't put it exactly that way,
Yeah.
but that was the essence of it. I had completely broken trust with everybody that was connected with me. But fortunately, by the grace of God, there were people who saw value to me, and maybe they saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And with their help, I was able to make restitution.
But where does the prison sentence come in?
Well, that's an interesting twist in the story, because the reality was, after I'd made restitution, the local district attorney didn't wish to prosecute. I had lost my license as a CPA. Of course, I was fired. My marriage was in shambles. I'd lost my home. All possessions were gone. And he felt that there was enough punishment that had taken place. But about mid-1991, I get a knock on the door from the IRS and the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor wanted to prosecute me for embezzlement because it was from clients' trust funds. The IRS for not paying tax on stolen money. And I have to admit, as tax partner in a CPA firm, it never crossed my mind that I should, on line 37, put other income,
They need
stolen
to have
money.
a spot in there,
Didn't cross my mind. Didn't cross my mind.
Line item.
So we're talking federal problems here.
We're talking federal, and just like in Madoff's situation, they came to me. I had already admitted what had taken place by this point in time, and they were looking for a plea agreement. If you don't do that, the repercussions tend to be much worse.
It's funny, they play that card often, don't they?
Well,
if you don't, this will happen.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
This is really heavy-handed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And their objective is bring justice and win. And I don't blame them for that. That's their job, and that was perfectly legitimate and reasonable. And in my case, I, in fact, did plead guilty.
And how long did you spend in prison?
Well, it was an 18-month sentence. In federal, you have to serve 85% of your sentence, so I was in for 16 months with 3 years probation.
How did it change your life?
Walking into prison that first day was actually life-changing. When they put me in this little holding cell with a bench and a toilet and said, "Here, read this material," I sat there and I thought to myself, what in heaven's name have I done? And I will say to you, I never want to be back. But it was one of the best things that could have ever happened to me.
How so?
It helped me understand what it meant to be Chuck Gallagher, what it meant to be a somebody, what really was important in life versus the trappings of success. Because the trappings of success are just trappings.
You are a nice guy. I mean, I've known you just in the last 2 or 3 years, and you go out of your way to help people. You go out of your way to encourage people that may be dealing with challenges. Is that all because you have been in prison?
Well, I think there's a part of me that was always that way. I strayed from what I knew. People have wrong. Well, yeah, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't think about it at the time because I got caught up in my own rationalization and in my own illusion. But prison did sear into me. It's kind of like a brand that to be successful, it isn't about the things. It's about the impact that you have on other people's lives. So if there's anything that I can do that will bring about a positive impact, to me, that's creating success.
Wow.
Well, that's not the typical description or prescription of and for success. The idea of the trappings that's more common, that being renowned today, being famous, not for anything, just being famous, you're saying just being who you are and helping people and How is that? How you're describing it?
Well, it is because Marcus, if you look at it and you sit back and you think, the reality is the trappings will all go away. We come into this life with nothing. We're going to go out with nothing.
Yeah.
So the reality is, while we're here, what impact do you have? I heard this morning one of Madoff's victims say, "Oh my gosh, my life is ruined. It's destroyed." It's really my life. In fact, they said my life is over. Life isn't over if you don't have money. That doesn't make any sense. There is still some value that we have, whether we happen to be wealthy or not.
You lost everything, Chuck.
I
You
did.
know that there's a way for people to build back.
Absolutely.
And in these tough economic times, it's got to offer other people hope.
Well, the thing about it is you can survive from any circumstance that you have. Most of it's a function of the choices that you make. I typically to them. Every choice has a consequence. No matter how insignificant it may be, today the choices you make will shape the future that you have. And so going to prison, it really, again, seared it into me that I need to be cautious and think about the choices that are made.
Yeah.
Because many times we choose the actions, but we don't choose the consequence. There will be one, but we don't get to choose that. We get to choose the action.
Absolutely.
And it could be for good. You choose to help somebody. The consequence may be, well, you don't know what it'll be, but it could be good. If you choose, if there's a seed of greed, it will have a consequence.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, we want to hear more of your story. And also, I've got some questions for you about Bernie Madoff.
Sure.
So we'll get to those after the break. And we'd like to invite you, our listeners and viewers, to call in and ask questions if you have any. Our toll-free number is 1-877-FAMNET1. That's 1-877-326-6381. This is Mornings on FamilyNet Radio and FamilyNet Television. And I guess you could call this a Financial Friday with this topic. What do you
Sounds like
think?
it, yeah. It's a fun financial Ford Friday, second hour.
We'll be right back after these very important messages.
It's 38 after the hour, and I'm slow on the switch. I got to tell you, it is FamilyNet and Sirius 161. We're having a great, lively discussion with Chuck.
We really are. Yeah, we've got Chuck Gallagher with us. We've heard a little bit about his trip to prison for doing something similar to Bernie Madoff, and how you have just come clean, and now you're teaching people about the consequences of poor choices.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's go to our phone lines. We've got Kevin, a first-time caller to Mornings. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Good morning, ma'am. How are you doing today?
Really good. So do you have a question or comment for Chuck?
No, I just wanted to, I just heard what he said about how when he was in prison, how it changed his life. I just wanted to touch on that because 7 years ago, I was pretty much in the same shoes. I was a drug addict and went to jail, and my wife doesn't understand it, or she doesn't see how going to jail can have a positive impact on your life. And 7 years ago, I was doing drugs, and now 7 years later, I'm clean and got a good trucking business right now and stuff like that. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Well, Kevin, we're proud of you. Congratulations. That's
Indeed.
great.
Yes, Kevin. Absolutely.
It's completely awesome. And another thing to touch on is right after I went to jail, and I only spent 4 months and 2 days in there. Right after I went to jail, got back in with God and got resaved, and was getting clean and everything. And just the Psalms 23, how your cup runneth over. I wanted to touch on that because I got two boys down there in Merritt Island that my mom wasn't letting me see them at all. I mean, when she took them from me, period. There was no questions asked. The day I got out of jail, and the people that I even committed my crime against, they told me that they never wanted to see me again. They were the only two people that come to see me while I was in. And the day that I got out of jail, I stayed in their house again, and we still have our friendship of 20 years. And the day after I got out of jail, my mom brought my kids over out of the clear blue for me to be able to see them. So
Oh, that's good. That's great, Kevin. Well, thank you so much for calling, Kevin, and sharing your experiences with us.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Call again.
All righty.
Chuck, did you have a similar experience with friends and family? Who stood by you when you went to prison?
Well, the people that I had been in business with, they scattered quickly. And it began to expose who your true friends were, the people that cared about you for who you are, not for the things that you have or what you might bring into their lives. And I did find, as I was listening to what Kevin was saying, that there is an element of truth to the fact that prison can be a life-changing experience and can bring about many positive repercussions that can come from that. A lot of it's a function of the attitude that you have,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
what you want the outcome to be.
Yeah.
Interesting when you look at a situation like a drug addict, maybe dealing in and having a difficult time anyway, struggling with life, and he goes into prison. The one good thing is there's structure, order, place to sleep. It's an environment. I was thinking this morning as I was reading about Madoff, from his penthouse, and probably a chef and certain kinds of food and used to certain lifestyle. I mean, when that whistle goes off at 6 a.m. and you're eating breakfast at 6:30 and it's, instant egg. I was just thinking about the difference between having, that silver thing open up and here's your breakfast to a metal thing open up and here's your breakfast.
Right. Yeah, life has changed for him. And I have to say, although I know his victims don't want to hear this, but there is a human side that says, here he is, he's 70 years old, and the likelihood is he will spend the rest of his natural life in prison.
So do you have any sympathy at all for him?
I have
empathy.
I have empathy.
Yeah.
What he did was morally repugnant. It wasn't the right thing to do. I understand that completely. But yet at the same time, it's a bit sad to see someone who's lived 70 years of their life, and obviously a brilliant person, a competent person, who will end up, their legacy in life will be, Charles Ponzi created the scheme, but Bernie Madoff with all the money. That's his legacy. For his children, for his grandchildren, that's what he will be remembered by.
That phrase is thrown around a lot, Ponzi scheme. For those who don't know what that means, where did that come from?
Okay, it's real simple. Marcus, I come along and I convince you to let me invest $20,000 of your money, and I promise you that I'm going to get you a 20% return. Okay? Now, in order to create that illusion, I need to give you that return back, $4,000, but I get Lori's $20,000 because now she's trusted you to trust me, and it keeps piling on top of each other. And I hate to say this, but it's a bit like the federal government bailout. There is a point at which you have to pay back borrowed money. So do we have a massive Ponzi scheme?
Yeah. Oh, you'd have to think so.
Okay, so you $1,000, you don't pay back my $24,000.
I give him his $4,000. He thinks he's got his 20% return, and I create the illusion. And if you want some back, I'm going to get money from someone else, and I will pay you some of it back. And as long as I can keep the illusion alive, the inflow of money coming in and doling out tidbits to you to keep the illusion alive, the scheme is great. But when the economy turned, and you'll notice you're seeing a lot of it now, Madoff, Stanford, Gordon Grigg, there's a whole list of them. When the economy turns, what happens is people then clamor for their money. Well, Madoff didn't have any more money.
Yeah. Well, you brought it up. You talked about, are we in a big Ponzi scheme?
Sure.
And so, as of last fall, I believe, China became the biggest debtor, surpassing Japan as the biggest debtor, creditor of the United States.
Correct.
And just in the last 24 hours, I understand that the Chinese are saying, well, hang on a second, we want some assurances.
Oh, no.
We want some assurances here that this money that we're lending you is not a Ponzi scheme. And, it's one of those things, the suggestion of, that potential ripple effect can affect our ability to borrow.
Absolutely.
Because there's some people saying, how in the world, even liberal Michael Kinsey saying, how do you pay this money back? When you spend, you can't just flip it around. What are you going to do? The inflation, default?
Well, and the answer to that question is really tough. I've talked with some economists at various universities. I talked to a lot of university students, and they say, what credit of the United States government? Well, that's good as long as people believe that we're going to do what we say we're going to do. But when you continue to pile debt upon debt upon debt upon debt, there is ultimately a payday. And in a Ponzi scheme, the only difference between truly the U.S. and a Ponzi scheme is we're clearly saying we're borrowing and people know that it's an arm's length transaction. In a Ponzi scheme, you don't know that.
Right, yeah.
I want to get back to your story, Chuck. When you came out of prison, you couldn't be a CPA anymore.
No.
How did you go from nothing? You had no possessions left, no house, I'm guessing no family.
The only thing that survived prison was the love of my 2 children by the grace of God. Other than that, everything else was gone.
So how did you start over? I mean, what did you do for a living? What did you do?
Well, actually, I went into sales. I was fortunate that a company that I had a connection with would hire me doing door-to-door sales. And I remember going in, I made this decision. I said, I'm going to be the #1 salesperson they have. Choices, consequences. And because of doing that, when you produce, when you're able to show someone what your competence is, then other opportunities unfold. And as it turns out, some 10 years later, I became a senior VP of sales and marketing in that public company. And in a public company, that's odd to have a convicted felon who is a senior VP.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things, Lorri, for me, that there needed to be some time when I could reconnect with who I am and what to show that you can overcome adversity. You can transform adversity into opportunity.
What are the keys to doing that?
Well, part of it is accepting pure responsibility and accountability for your choices. So many people walk around wanting to be a victim. You hear this, it's accept the accountability for it. I hate to put it this way because I know, again, I step on people's toes, but in Madoff's situation, we hear the victims talk about having lost everything, but they invested everything with Madoff.
And they were financial advisors.
Right.
Some of them.
That makes no sense.
Yeah.
I mean, even a chicken farmer will tell you don't put all your eggs in one basket. It just really makes no sense. But one thing that people do typically ask is, how do I avoid it? So there's 3 things. Thing number 1, if someone is promising you something that is too good to be true, run. There is no such thing as too good to be true. That's issue number 1. 2, for those people who invested everything with one person or one advisor, that makes no sense. You know, people without a great education understand you don't do that. And the third thing is, and I hate to say it this way, but it's true, people like myself years ago, or Bernie Madoff or others, victimize people who are close to them. So don't invest with a friend. If you're going to a friend, a relative, too good to be true, all your eggs in one basket, and don't invest with friends.
Keep a distance, a relationship.
Keep the relationship, an arm's length relationship. Right. Think about what you're doing.
And ask the hard questions.
That's absolutely correct.
Because you can't do that with a brother-in-law or it's harder to do that anyway.
It certainly is. And it's easier to be sucked into what I call the pit. That's promise, illusion, and trust. And that's what that's what happened to those folks. So, you know, if you take that simple advice, you won't be a victim.
We have a minute left. Tell us about your foundation.
Well, one of the things that happened in prison is I was speaking to a group of 5th graders, and it occurred to me that there is a cycle of poverty for some folks. I actually grew up in the projects whenever I was in high school, and so I set up a thing called the Choices Foundation, and that foundation affords me the opportunity to speak to high school students across the country, to talk with them about choices and consequences, and the proceeds from that also help fund college educations for folks, and I'm especially looking for people who have parents that are in prison. It's my way of paying it forward.
Yeah.
That is great, Chuck. Well, we want to encourage people to book you as a speaker too. They can get this great ethics at their church, their community, their school, their business. Go to chuckgallagher.com.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to have you, Chuck.
Yeah, it really is. I've learned a lot. Have you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. These guys are, he knows it.
Yeah,
you have to live it.
does.
But once you do, you know it. Right. Hopefully.
You do.
Well, we'll be back in about 3 minutes to have more of Mornings and wrap up today's show. Hope you're still having a fun Friday.